Tour de France riders are some of the fittest humans on the planet, if not the fittest. The Tour is a ridiculously hard physical challenge. But how do they compare to the rest of us? What's the typical resting heart rate of a Tour de France cyclist? How do they fatigue throughout the event? How do their bodies recover? How much sleep do they get? And just how big a toll does it take on their bodies? Well, thanks to our friends at Whoop, we've managed to get some exclusive data from the EF Pro Cycling team who've been wearing Whoop devices tracking all this throughout the Tour. This data is an incredibly fascinating insight into the physiology of these elite athletes and how their bodies respond to such a demanding event. And I can't wait to share it with you. It's just incredible what they're capable of. Now let's dive straight in, starting with heart rate. Now, what is the resting heart rate of a Tour de France rider? Well, the average adult human is said to be between 60 and 100 beats per minute. But at the start of the race, when in theory Tour de France riders should be fully rested and you'd hope at peak fitness, the average for the EF Pro Cycling team was just 41 beats per minute, which is incredibly low. But we also have specific data, not just for the team as an average, but for specific riders, Alberto Bettiol and Nilsson Paulus. Now, the other riders are anonymised within the data set we've got, which is understandable. Not everyone wants to share their things publicly, but Bettiol, a previous winner of the Tour of Flanders, had a resting heart rate of just 37 beats per minute on the eve of the Tour de France. And Whoop suggested that he was fully recovered at that point as well, with a 98% recovery score. Now, to put that into context, if Alberto Bettiol was in a hospital bed wired up to machines, a resting heart rate that low would be setting off alarms in the hospital. Now, their heart rates are so low because their cardiovascular systems are so efficient. Their hearts are stronger than the average person, understandably, and these bigger pumps are more powerful and can therefore pump a higher volume of blood around the body with a single beat than a sort of standard pump or heart. Also, the networks of capillaries and their blood vasculature is also more developed and more efficient as well, also helping with that lower heart rate. However, Alberto Bettiol, as impressive as 37 beats per minute is resting heart rate, it's not the lowest that's been reported. Chris Froome has previously been reported to have had a resting heart rate as low as 29 beats per minute. Incredible, but even he's not the lowest. Big Mig, Miguel Indurain, multiple Grand Tour winner, 28 beats per minute. Absolutely bonkers. Yeah. But something interesting is that after intense days, when their heart is fatigued and constantly under strain, we see that their resting heart rates actually start to increase throughout the race. And we can see that the resting heart rate of the riders climbs through the first week of the Tour. The first week of this year's Tour was especially tough. And by stage 7, the average for the team was 51 beats per minute. So it's significantly gone up. And we can also see, just how tough the Tour is on their bodies, stage by stage. So by analysing the heart rate variability, that's the amount of time between individual heartbeats, also the heart rate and the heart rate response throughout a given day, the Whoop algorithm is able to calculate something called a strain score. And the strain score gives us an idea of each day how much toll that day has taken on the rider's body. Now, I can see from the data that the riders consistently have a strain score of around 20. Now, that might not mean much to you, but I'm going to put it into context. So I wear a Whoop, and if I have a day where I don't do much at all, if I sort of, walk 5 minutes to the office, sit on my bum all day doing GCN stuff, and then walk home 5 minutes, and then sit on my bum watching TV for the rest of the day, I typically have a strain score of around 6 to 8. Now, when I did the recent coast-to-coast epic ride with Hank, where we absolutely destroyed ourselves, I had a strain score of 20, like these guys have. And I was absolutely battered. There was absolutely no way I was going to be able to ride my bike the next day. I can't imagine being able to do that every day for 21 stages, day after day after day. It's absolutely insane. We can also see from the data that not all stages are equal, and stage 2 of this year's race was particularly savage. This is likely down to have been a combination of the parkour. It was a very hilly stage around Nice, as you may remember, but also because every team saw this stage as an opportunity to take the yellow jersey, and therefore the race was completely on. Now, Neilson Paulus on EF Pro Cycling came 4th on stage 2, and as a result his recovery suffered the next day. He rode really hard that day and it was just 53% recovered the next day. But even though he came 4th, he fared a lot better than the rest of his team, who averaged just 36% recovery. And one of the reasons for this is likely to be that he recovered better than the rest of his team because he slept much better. So Paulus averaged 9 hours of sleep after that stage, but the rest of the team averaged just 7 hours, and that is going to be significant. Sleep is so key to recovery. So, top of the class, Neilson Paulus. I hope Sports Director Jonathan Vaughters gave you a gold star. With all this strain on their bodies throughout the Tour, sleep is absolutely fundamental to recovery. But you know, how much sleep do the riders actually get? Even sleeping at the Tour de France is difficult because the riders often have long transfers from one stage to the beginning of the next stage the next day. They often sleep in a different hotel room each night, which, if you're anything like me, it isn't great for your sleep. And there's also media commitments and just getting their massages done and, you know, getting all the food in. It all takes time and all eats into the amount of time they have to sleep. During the Tour, the team has averaged 7.42 hours of sleep a night. And we can also see that Neilson Paulus is once again top of the class. He averaged 36 more minutes of sleep than his teammates. And, well, over the course of a Tour, 3 weeks, that's really going to add up. The night before the Tour was also their best night's sleep. The team averaged nearly 9 hours on that night and had a 99% sleep score. But the fact that they can't match this level of sleep performance, even though they're really tired throughout the rest of the Tour, is really indicative of just how hectic it can be. Something really interesting is that the team got noticeably less sleep after stage 13, just 6.7 hours on average. So I've done some detective work to find out why this might be the case. Now, this was a particularly tough stage. It started at noon. It was a very mountainous stage. Neilson Paulus, he was in the break and he was on his bike, we can see, for 6.45 hours. So, very long day. Many of the riders didn't finish until after 6 p.m. We can then couple that with a long transfer, which was, I think, over 2 hours to the start of the next stage. This is on mountain roads, getting stuck in Tour traffic because all the Tour teams and media circus are moving to the next stage as well. And this really eats into the potential sleep window. But we can also factor in that EF Pro Cycling team member Danny Martinez won stage 13 for EF Pro Cycling. So we can perhaps speculate that there might have been the odd glass of celebratory champagne around the dinner table that night, which again is likely, if it did happen, to have influenced the sleep performance of the riders, as alcohol has massive detrimental impact to your sleep. Something else the Whoop data can tell us about is recovery. And this, for me, is one of the most fascinating areas of the data. Looking at these numbers, we can see how the riders are recovering throughout the race. And yes, recovering. If you or I were to ride the Tour de France, I think we'd start with the best of intentions, but we'd probably just end up just getting slower and slower and slower until we were just miserably crawling in a ball of self-pity across the finish line in Paris. But astonishingly, the riders appear to actually get fitter after the first rest day. Yep, fitter. Alberto Bettiol in particular stands out in this regard. And their bodies are so tuned and adapted to high strain and high volumes of training that even though what they're doing is incredibly hard, as soon as they get this rest day, their bodies are able to sort of bounce back and absorb that training. And it appears from the data that there may be physiological adaptations as well. So leading into the first rest day, that first week had been incredibly hard. The average heart rate, resting heart rate for the team had been 51, but this actually dropped after the rest day to 40, which was lower than what it was average for the team at the start of the race, 41. And Bettiol, incredibly, his dropped to just 34 beats per minute resting heart rate. You know, the average recovery score on the rest day was 92, and that's just incredible how their bodies can just bounce back from that. If I'd done what they'd done in that first week, or attempted to do it, I'd probably need like months off to recover from that level, that load of work. I'd just be destroyed. They needed a day. Oh God. Fortunately, the riders are human, and we can see that fatigue does build throughout the race. This combined with just the amount of physical activity they're doing day after day, also the fact that they're not getting the optimum amount of sleep for 3 weeks, you know, the peloton is really tired by the end of the week. Something else that stands out in the data is we can see how much harder you can make the same stage. So this is something that's kind of a little bit obvious and, you know, well established, is that, you know, if you're riding in the breakaway, you can expend much more energy than if you're sat in the bunch. But the data allows us to sort of quantify that and see it in the numbers. So Neilson Powless is riding his first ever Tour de France, and he's making a great account of himself. He's actually ridden, astonishingly, in the breakaway on stage 6, 8, 13 and 16. And arguably one of the things that's helped him do this is probably his sort of better sleeping habits, as that will have boosted his recovery. I can also see that Powless absolutely destroyed himself on stage 8. Unfortunately, he didn't win the stage, but he did incredibly well in the breakaway. He spent 51% of that stage in 80 to 90% of his max heart rate, and 38% of the stage in over 90% of his heart rate zone. So his max heart rate, to put that into context, was 191, and his average heart rate for the whole 4.2 hours of that stage was 165 beats per minute. That is savage, especially seeing as he's done this more than once on more than one stage. And his average power, if you're interested in that sort of thing, was 286 watts. This is for a guy that weighs reportedly just 66 kilograms. It's serious going for 4.2 hours, that. But then we can compare that to Bettiol, who spent only 20% of that stage in his 80% plus sort of heart rate zones. So he had a much easier day of it, and it gives you an idea of just how tough it can be to ride in the breakaway in the Tour de France. We also have several presenters here who've ridden Grand Tours here at GCN, so I've asked them what their experiences were, and Connor Dunn told me that his resting heart rate started at 44 beats per minute, but by the end of a 3-week Grand Tour, his resting heart rate was around 70 beats per minute. Such was the large amount of fatigue that he'd built up. I didn't ask him about how well he slept, but he wasn't wearing a whoop, so he couldn't really track it. Interestingly, Dan Lloyd as well has said that his resting heart rate increased by the end of the stage, and also his max heart rate, or the heart rate that he could sustain at sort of threshold wattages, actually decreased towards the end of a Grand Tour. But interestingly, this didn't necessarily correspond to the power output that he could produce. So he was still producing sort of threshold power that he could at the start of the tour, but the heart rate at which he was doing that had dropped, which I think is really quite fascinating, and probably down to the fact that there's been adaptations and increased blood plasma volume as well. But I guess that's another story for another time. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the physiological data of the riders. Big thanks to EF Pro Cycling for sharing the data, and also Whoop as well. And if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends if you've found it interesting. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you know, with this kind of science and looking at the physiological data of the riders, then let us know in the comments, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Bye.